There's the button. 1. Okay. And wait, why is it not showing up? Wow. Okay. So immediately I clicked the thing and immediately I get technical difficulties on my end where it's not actually showing the meeting.
No, I can hear us. I'm jumped into it. I can hear us.
Yeah, I don't know why the video is hidden. Why is the video hidden?
Hi, people watching.
Yeah, hi. Sorry about the weird technical problems. Let's see if I can.
I'm watching to see when it pops, when it changes.
I'm
Are you
checking
using
out.
OBS?
What? Yes, I'm using it on OBS. Zoom got updated recently, so I don't know if
I'm looking right
that's
now.
causing-
I'm looking right now. Share screen, chat, rename themselves. I took
something's
everything.
happening.
Took everything off. Took everything off lock. So now anybody who actually can get the link can jump in, which is not a great thing.
Is that speaker view right there?
What's that?
What?
Yeah, we're on speaker view.
Well, if I'm
no,
looking
we're on Brady Bunch view. That's not what it's called, but
Gotcha.
Why is this not? Why is this not showing up, OBS? Why are you being mean to us?
You can't capture this screen?
Oh yeah, I suppose I could just do a screen capture. I could do it the old-fashioned way. There we go. I overthink everything, so I didn't think to band-aid the situation, of course.
It's all right.
Yeah. So welcome to the Fluid Voice. Everything is working now.
Everything will be okay.
Yeah, everything's fine.
Don't panic.
This isn't like shit. I need to. Well, I'm gonna start doing something so I can see all the chat easier. At least it wasn't like that one day in which we had even worse technical. Oh, that's not.
I'm just
email.
making sure to promote us on Twitter real quick.
Okay.
Thank you.
On the Twitter.
What do you mean invalid email or password? Those are passwords and emails. And it's the correct one. God damn it. fluidvoice@gmail.com. That's the email. What the? Oh well. Let me I'll just check back and forth.
Okay.
So I can, end up seeing both chat, or maybe I can there. I'll minimize one of the windows. I can't see chat though. There we go. This should allow me. There we go. Hello. Okay. So hi. This is. Oh wait, no. Now this is bleeding over to.
This is why I record.
Yeah, I know, but sometimes this stuff is fun. It's fun to have technical issues.
It's always interesting.
Yeah. So.
And hello, Mackenzie out there in the chat. It's nice to see you there.
Yeah, it's nice to see you too, Boomclank Iliani. So.
Hi, Al.
This is me, Ozma in the Dark, and joined in by my co-host Christy. How are you doing?
I'll tell you in a minute. That's that.
Okay. How about you, Perfict? my other wonderful co-host, the token.
I'm doing well.
The token straight dude, cis straight dude.
I'm doing well.
Oh, that's good. It's good that you're
Watching
doing well.
a lot of Star Trek this week.
You and all of us.
Well,
or at least me.
I should have been watching more Star Trek. I don't know. I've been a mess.
You're not watching it all day, every day. I'm offended deeply.
I've watched every single episode of Doctor Who. If that helps.
I have not.
Yeah, I am to Doctor Who what you are to Star Trek.
Oh, yes. And not to tangent too much, here's our wonderful guest, Jessie Gender.
How are you?
I'll tell you how I am. I have been, I've been sick for the last month, and I thought it was the regular flu. It was not.
It wasn't
It was the bug. We all came down with it in the house, and we're all just past it now.
Good. Well, I'm glad you're all good. Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, now you got that immunity, so at least for a while, hopefully.
Well, yeah, unless it mutates, in which case.
Woo! I mean, it probably will. Hope it just depends on how long, I guess, is the question.
Yeah.
We're all gonna die. We're in the apocalypse. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm not sick, so everything. Anyways,
well, if you hear me, I sound a lot better than I have. Which I was taking so much Sudafed and Benadryl just to keep from my face falling off on stream.
I'm glad you're okay.
The people at the pharmacy thought you were running a meth lab, right?
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, it turns out that we all got it. So
I mean, I'm sure. I mean, it's gotta suck, but I guess there's got to be some relief that you're like kind of on the downward slope of it.
Oh, I'm on the past slope. About 4 days ago, everything just went great. So that's.
I've been terrified of catching it. Not really even for myself, because I know I'll probably be okay. But I know my roommate's immunodeficient, so I've been mostly worried for him. Make sure.
Yeah, I am. It shouldn't have been so mild on me. I'm quite prone. I'm quite prone to pneumonia. So
don't look a gift horse in the mouth. I'm just glad you're doing fine. So
yeah.
Gift horse of a mild case of COVID-19.
Yeah. A month of crap and shortness of breath and shit.
So, let's start things off on Star Trek. Because Star Trek
is a good way to start. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Star Trek has dealt a lot with obviously a number of political things, as most sci-fi does, unless it's science fantasy, in which case that's its own other story.
Then usually it's just fascism, and that's about the extent of their the most extreme.
Yeah. So, yeah, so I figured we'd start off with the one thing I could think of, which was the obvious Star Trek episode that deals with transitioning, since this is the fluid voice, and people can go off on what they think of that and other stuff, but I think the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, I don't remember the episode exactly. I'm going just off my memory.
I just looked it up before we started. The Host is the name of the episode.
Yeah, okay, it is the name of the episode, is The Host.
It's
where Dr. Crusher falls in love with that one Betazoid, and then that Betazoid... What? Trill, sorry.
Right. Yeah.
But
everybody's in love with the Betazoids.
I mean, yeah. There's a whole discussion on the Betazoids' sexual promiscuity.
Yeah, sorry. This is what I get for not watching Star Trek all the time. But anyway, she falls in love with the Trill, who presents very male, and let's say the Trill metaphorically transitions due to condition. And since Trills are pretty agender, I would argue, because they don't seem to pay much attention to gender. That doesn't seem, at least none of the trolls that I've seen, or at the very least not the troll in that episode.
Yeah, in that episode, they don't seem to care. It gets a little muddled in Deep Space Nine with Jessie because they seem to care a little bit more there.
Gotcha. It's been
Star
forever
Trek...
since I watched DS9, so.
Well, that's the best one. But it's. I mean, the caveat with all Star Trek, really, is that like, especially under Rick Berman, was that they were very much caught in like binary modes of doing gender. So it was like, yes, he was male presenting, and yes, they didn't like care a lot about gender, but it was still like he was male presenting, and then there's a female presenting Trill that Trill eventually ends up in, and that kind of puts Crusher off.
Yeah, well, I believe the end of the episode, from my recollection, is Crusher being all like, breaking up with Trill and being all like, someday in the future, like, gender won't be as big of a deal for relationships, but until that day comes.
I can't be with, I mean, I'd have to look at her exact wording. I mean, you could kind of make it work being like, she's straight, so is not interested, but then, that sort of like, maybe one day we'll be better. And I was like, I really hope we're better by the 24th freaking century.
It's the Star Trek version of Society's Child. The song. I hope I keep making old references. I'm old.
Yeah, but then you randomly make a new reference, and then I totally miss it.
I'm the bad guy.
Star Trek: The Next Generation. The Next Generation in and of itself is kind of an old reference, you know.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah. I mostly remember because I grew up on it, and so what are your thoughts on that episode and that whole situation? Because it seems like a very outside of transition, like the outside perspective of relationships and people going through, like the significant other going through a relationship.
I mean, oh, sorry, no, please.
Oh, yeah, no, go on. That was all.
No, I mean, I can rant about this for a while, so I don't want to like dominate the conversation. Shush me at any point, because I'll rant about Star Trek forever. That's why I do it all the time. So
it's like you have a channel or something.
I know, it's like a whole thing. But yeah, no, I like I was saying before, like this is the caveat with all Star Trek, is that like there's so, when it comes to sexuality and trans issues and many other issues as well, but specifically this one, there's so much like you can read into it that really means a lot. Like, I mean, I creepily have my Jessie cut out in the background there. Like, she means a lot to me as like a Trill character.
Yeah.
And like I saw myself so much in her character as a trans person and who I wanted to be as a trans person, but it's also like that wasn't really the intention of the writers. And so like, when I look at the host, it's kind of like it's like this interesting push and pull that you always have to do, especially with like Rick Berman era Star Trek, because Rick Berman was kind of a crappy producer, especially when, again, coming to LGBTQ and sexuality issues. In that, like, there's this tension between what the intention was by the writers, and then what the producers would then allow them to show, and then what you can interpret out of it. And so when I look at the host, it's this interesting thing of like trying to figure out what exactly the episode was trying to say, because 90% of the episode is like, it is kind of that transition narrative, because it goes from a male body guy, and then he goes into Riker. Like the guy dies, and then the Trill goes into Riker for a while. And then it goes into the woman at the end of the episode. And so it's sort of like this discussion on how, I mean, it's hard for me to articulate, because it's like, I don't think the writers were sitting there being like, this is a transition narrative. They were, it's like, it's like what like, was it just their weird like, this is going to be a weird thing humanity's going to be dealing with when we're sleeping with aliens and people changing, and or is it like metaphorical, like people change throughout relationships?
It was specifically meant as a trans episode. If from
Was it?
interviews that I've seen it, or read at least, the one interview I saw and one interview I read, and they tried to sneak in LGBT as much as they could. And if you recall, I'm sure you've seen What We Left Behind, the documentary. Where Stephen Bear apologizes that they weren't better on LGBTQ issues.
Mm-hmm. So it does give himself weirdly a pat on the back for the like really awful trans episode that they did, which was interesting in that doc. They did. There's Profit and Lace was the one, and it's just sort of like, okay, sure. The episode where they like have Quark become a woman and like pretend to like be a woman for a while to like sneakily like trick this dude, which just feeds into the like trans people are tricky narrative. And then there's like the whole like Quark wants to get laid, or the guy who wants to sleep with Quark, so then it becomes like this farcical like, Quark doesn't want to have sex because then the guy would feel upset, and
and the Ropers would be mad.
It's he like in the doc he like pats himself. Now don't get me wrong, Stephen Bear I think is a wonderful human and a wonderful writer, so I don't want to condemn him too much, but he does like weirdly give himself a pat on the back in that part of the documentary for that episode, and then goes and like says like, we also didn't do well for LGBTQ issues. So it's kind of an interesting like, he has enough self-awareness, but also obviously some blind points, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
One of the things they said about that is that it was a transition. It wasn't like he said they interviewed stuff again. It's like, or I think Armin Shimmerman said, yes, he was completely transitioned to she. Mm-hmm. So,
and I mean, there's always that fun idea that I really love in that trans people exist in Star Trek, and we just don't know it because they've just gender. We clearly see with Quark, you can like transition to a woman and transition back in the course of a day. So like people would just be transition, like they figured it out. It was like, we accept trans people. They figure out the gender when they're young and then just go about their lives. And we just never really see it.
Yeah, no, I mean that.
Which isn't ever there, but it's not in the show.
But I mean, like the first episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, there were a lot more men in skirts.
Yes.
Well, I mean dresses, I should say.
Scants, I guess, is the.
Yeah. Which is a shame that left after the first season, or was it just the pilot episode?
No, it was in the first. It was in the first 2 seasons actually, and that was probably a Roddenberry edition that kind of went away once he passed away and kind of gave more control to Rick Berman. Not to say that Roddenberry was perfect; he has many of his own issues, but he weirdly was like very like. Roddenberry was one of the most horniest men that you have ever met in your life. You read anything about Roddenberry, horny, so horny. But he was, and he not exactly great for women. I mean, if you look at the original series and even Next Generation, but he did have some very, I think, interesting stuff to say about how, like, in the future, sex would be much less stigmatized. So it's still couched in like very like male, straight male terms. But he was leaning towards the right direction there, which was interesting. And so when Rick Berman came in he at the start of Next Generation, and then sort of kind of got more control as Gene Roddenberry got sicker and sicker and eventually died, Rick Berman had a lot more uneasiness with that sort of stuff and was much more like this like stifled like producer, and like, I don't know if we can do those sort of things. It might make the audience weird, and so you sort of saw that sort of stuff go away. Sorry, this is my brain just ranting too much behind the scenes Star Trek facts. Apologies.
The way he talked,
you were here for Star Trek facts.
The way he talked, it sounded like he read a lot of Lazarus Long, the Robert Heinlein stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Again, old reference.
Vaguely aware of Robert Heinlein. Vaguely.
Oh, Lazarus Long is a product of himself and his own mother having sex, and there's versions of him that are male and female and in between.
Gotcha.
It's really complicated to explain it all. And there's a lot of libertarian bullshit you have to get through too, but
Yeah.
I mean they're yeah, two short books and three insanely long books.
I mean, I'm currently going through, I'm reading the Asimov books right now, the Foundation books. So, and that's been interesting to sort of see like him spend a whole, like this interesting, really thoughtful science fiction. And then there's like a whole, like 3 paragraphs about a woman's breast size. It's like, ooh, fun.
Well, they need to have like a half a page describing, this person's firm, perky breasts that, almost gaze into you like what it was like some
like the eyes of my soul. Yeah. What was the other thing I was going to say too on this? We should also touch upon the Outcast, which is an interesting episode.
Which episode's the Outcast?
The Outcast is the one where they encounter the non-binary, the agender race that Riker falls in love with.
Oh, okay.
That's that was like meant to be their was like supposed to be their big gay episode, but kind of like if you go back and watch it, like it kind of fails as a homosexuality metaphor for what it was aiming for, but like is weirdly is still a really progressive take on trans issues, even though like the trans issues are couched as like it's this weird, crazy alien thing that probably could, like, an agender, non-binary people. What a crazy thought!
Who could have guessed that would ever happen? Maybe in the distant future, this hypothetical event will occur.
Exactly. So it's like, but they actually got a lot of stuff right. Like Riker asks for what pronouns to use. It's weird that they don't have gender neutral pronouns, but he does ask, which in it like. The non-binary person's like, we don't have, gender pronouns, so get over that. And he's like, well, I guess I'll muddle through. I'm Riker.
Well, Riker is like the stereotypical horny straight dude. Horny straight white dude. Yeah, that is 90% of Riker's personality from my recollection.
I'm down for it. Like watching Star Trek Picard, I'm like, I very much want Riker's pizza, and I mean that in every weird way that it could be taken.
Yeah.
I think I got this from you, but you said it's Frakes really wanted to cast a man in the role.
No, yeah, he did. For the non-binary people, they only cast women to play them, and Jonathan Frakes criticized that episode. He's like, they really should have had a man in it because it would have meant so much more when I kissed her in the episode, because there have been like 2 men kissing on the show, and they didn't have two same-gendered people kiss on Star Trek until Deep Space Nine, which was another Trill episode. So.
Yeah, that was what's her? The person behind you was like the first one, right?
Yeah, and she kissed a woman.
Yeah, and I can't remember in the episode did the woman date like her? Was she previously Was the troll previously a man and then had dated the woman before, and then they still loved each other type thing?
Yeah, that was the basic conceit. Like, she was actually the wife. She was the wife of her previous host, who was a man. They met each other, and they kind of still had feelings for each other, and they kind of wanted to follow through on it. But there's a stigma in Trill society that's like, you can't be with someone who you knew in a previous life. So that actually works really, really well with the transition narrative of like fitting in with what we were talking about earlier with the host of like partners with people who transition, debating whether or not they should stay with their partners or not because of the like, number one, do I still like someone who's the same gender as me? Even if I do, there's the stigma of it. So that episode like works really, really, really well on that level. But again, it's again this interesting problem that Star Trek keeps running into it. This is like mixing sexuality and gender, because the point of the episode of what they were trying to say was to discuss the stigma against homosexuality, not the stigma of transitioning trans people. It was just like, oh, homosexuality, it's this metaphor we're talking about is a metaphor for homosexuality. So you can read it as a trans metaphor, but the intention was a sexuality metaphor. And it's just kind of interesting that consistently Star Trek, I don't even want to, for that episode doesn't necessarily miss the mark on sexuality, but it just mixes them up and actually weirdly ends up being a nice, prescient trans metaphor on accident.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I'm guessing that's because there's a lot of that where science fiction in general goes down hypotheticals, and so if they're not, if the people writing, whether or not they're aware of issues at the moment, they might want to experiment with potential situations in the future. So, and if they don't fully understand them, they're like, well, let's try to explore something a scenario that can help me learn.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting because when I talk about these things, I think it's always important to look at the writer's intention. I think it's fascinating, but then also it does limit the reading of the work, because we can and should read trans metaphor. I mean, again, it's why I love Jessie so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, please.
No, Dax is our girl. To go back to the host though, that original one. I've told the story often of me and my ex music partner sitting under a tree one night drinking a lot of rum and it coming out to each other and then saying we weren't ever coming out. And that was sparked by watching the host, actually, this conversation.
Oh, that's actually really cool. It's funny because my coming out also involved
it's cool and sad, but because we took so long to actually come out.
Well, also a little bit heartwarming. I don't know.
Yeah.
You knew someone that's immediately a nice thing. I didn't know anyone who, at the very least, I didn't know anyone who I knew was definitely trans until 2013, maybe 2014, like years and years after I came out, originally in like 2005 or something. So it's just like, spending 8 to 10 years just feeling very alone and group therapy. I mean, yes, I went to group therapy, but it's not like I knew those people well, and they were very I was poor, and I still have like a decent number of psychological problems, so I didn't really relate to everyone seeming to have everything in order, everything in life in order. And also, like, oh, I'll just do, what the psychologist says on transitioning. And it's just like, yeah.
I need to hold for a second. I'll be back.
Okay. Perfect. You've been really quiet. Did you think of any interesting Star Trek stuff that could potentially? You can ask. If you're like, this seems like it could be a related issue. I want to know. Go ahead and ask. We're here for that.
Well, I thought of the episode I can't remember the name of it. It was in the 3rd season, which dealt with Lal, Data's daughter.
Yeah. That was
and
The Offspring, I believe is the name of the episode.
That's it. Yes, The Offspring. Wow, you really are just a font.
It's all here for better or for worse.
I would say for today, for the better, at the very least. Anyway,
Where he created a child and then they chose their gender.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that
Yeah.
was actually a pretty good where they were trying to handle it, but it didn't really deal with the issue very much.
Yeah, it was. I actually
It wasn't an issue in the show.
Yeah, I actually did a video on it because again, another one where they did well and did badly. Because if you watch the episode, that section of it is like only the first 5-10 minutes of the episode, where Data creates a child, an offspring, and they're like kind of amorphous blob looking thing. And then they pick to be a girl, and they're allowed to sort of pick their gender. And they have a scene where Data, the pre-gender chosen offspring, and Troy are sort of walking down a hallway, and the agender version, basically the agender offspring, just points like, "Oh boy, oh girl," and there's no in between. There's no other acknowledgement. But Troy also said, asked the question of like, "Oh well, what gender you pick will determine how people interact with you." And that's sort of like the end of it. And the only other thing that's I found really unfortunate, and it's like the smallest of moments, but it goes to like how gender dehumanizes people. There's a moment where the sort of offspring says, "Oh, I have no gender. That means I'm inadequate." Like literally says the word inadequate. And so it's like this like viewing of no gender or non-gender as less than, or not as worthwhile. And it's like such a small offhand comment, but it goes to this larger idea of like non-binary people being seen as less than in sort of in public consciousness.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of those things where it could be like totally I mean that could be addressed well even with that line, because if they say that and then like Data's like, no, that doesn't make you less than, or it being corrected in some form by someone who's more knowledgeable.
But no, Data actually says yes. It's like gender inadequate, and it says yes, that's why you need to choose a gender, is literally I think the next line or something along those lines.
Oh my god, that's definitely
yeah,
that's not held up well socially.
Instead of saying
the concept of choosing your gender
appropriate,
is cool,
like no, not inadequate, but you have to the not inadequate, simply not dedicated to either of the proposition.
Mm-hmm.
If he said that,
exactly,
that would have been a step.
Exactly, but I mean, it is a step too in the episode, because I mean, like the very idea of like someone choosing a gender from birth is still in a way like progressive, is like how we should kind of treat, like we should offer more choices than like male or like boy or girl, but like we should be raising kids to like agenderedly and then have them sort of like come to their own determination of their gender as they grow older. So.
Yeah, I mean,
I say this as non-apparent, so I know that like major factors involved in that, as I'm sure Christy you could probably speak to as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. Lots of stuff that I would say off air that I don't say on air. Well, for the record, your pronouns are she, they.
Me?
Yes.
Mine are any pronouns you wish to use.
Mine are she, they.
I've noticed one thing. You like me don't mind anybody knowing your dead name, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's related to current name I saw.
Yeah.
The one thing about the to go back to the trill, the one thing that's been going through my mind recently, and for a while now actually, is that Christopher was a different person but was the same person. and I'm still having some trouble reconciling that, and I haven't figured out what to do with it.
I mean, actually, may I be weirdly esoteric, if in an interesting way to kind of jump off of that?
Well, yeah.
I actually just filmed a video right before we started shooting this about well, has everyone here finished or watched Star Trek Picard and or doesn't mind a mild spoiler?
I came in here knowing I'm fine with taking that risk. I've been terrible at catching up on any TV show, so I would prefer that we talk about Star Trek as opposed to, I care about that more than spoilers.
Okay. Well, I'll try and keep it as spoiler free as possible, but I was just doing a video about that show, and I'm trying to think like the best way to phrase it. So in that show, a character, let me put it that way, a character gets taken and put into a synthetic body, a body that is different from their own. They're basically taken from a biological and put inside a synthetic body. That's really the best way to put it. And it caused me to, like, people have been asking this question, is that person in this synthetic body still the same person, or are they different? And there's so many different like philosophical questions. Number one, basing off of like tech stuff of like, if we transfer a brain to a computer, is it a copy, is it the same person? But it's also this interesting sort of idea when you think about it of memory and transitions and are we ever the same person that we were 5 minutes ago? I mean, like who you were, regardless of transitioning, who you were 10 minutes ago is different than who you are now. Who you are 10 years ago is who you are different from who you are now. And all we are is this like accumulation of memories and thoughts leading into this moment. So how I look at my past experience as before I transitioned from James to Jessie is that the person who I was before is part of me and will always be part of me, but is not me now. And gender was a huge part of that, but I can't fully divorce how I was raised and how I thought about myself. That's who I am, but I'm also sort of separate from that and separate from that experience. And it's sort of that interesting sort of like, it's me, but it's not me. And it's a continuation of that person, but not a continuation of that person. And it is very hard to reconcile, but I think it's also in a weird way. And this is something I like to talk about a lot on my channel, is that like trans issues are often framed as like these really like esoteric different issues that like non-trans people could never identify with. But I feel like a lot of these feelings like that you're describing, Christy, of like not being able to reconcile with like trying to figure out like who you were in your past life and trying to reconcile with who you are now, that's a feeling that a lot of people feel, maybe in different ways, through age or you know, disability or disease or many are just generally growing older, becoming a parent. It's all part of the same sort of general flow and feeling of things. So I just found that to be, it's an interesting sort of philosophical hole that has no answer, but it's sort of an interesting idea. And sorry, I keep ranting.
Well, for one thing, you're a guest on here, but also
the guest talks as much as they want.
I know, but I'm used to having my own channel by myself where I rant at a camera by myself, so I forget when there are people in a conversation.
So yeah, when it comes to me, I'm a bit weird with that, and I don't know if it's because my parents didn't care about gender norms so much. Like they if it weren't for society, I probably would have worn more makeup as a kid. I definitely did it, and it's not like I definitely never got yelled at by my parents for playing with Barbies or doing makeup or anything like that. It was more so society that kind of pushed me away from that stuff. But so it's I think possibly because of that, it's very hard for me to think of me in my past as someone else because I wasn't completely pretending. I wasn't so heavily forced that forced away from being myself that that it's just like it just I don't know. It's an issue that I never really thought about and then started hearing a bunch, and I'm just like, okay. I guess that's a thing. I'm just like, that was my past.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because like I've even heard like even more extremes of like a friend of mine, to keep it as general as possible, a friend of mine had who came out as trans, and that partner basically said, want nothing to do with my previous life, don't even want to acknowledge that it existed, don't want to acknowledge that I was that person at any point. This is me and I move forward from here. And it's like I was born this day. And I totally understand that. I totally get that feeling, and it's not something I would ever hold against someone. But it also was interesting as seeing my friend, who this was their ex, see him sort of have this thing of like, okay, now that's okay, and I accept and support that. But now I feel like I have to be the entire bearer of our memories, and sort of that sort of weight of that previous life. And talked about this too in another video. Is like, there's a part we always talk about transition as like this celebratory moment. It's like I come out and I'm out as trans, and it's a celebration as transition, and it's, some bumps along the road with transition in terms of like finances, people treating you badly, but generally, if all goes well, it's a positive experience. But there's something we so rarely talk about, and I think it's important to talk about, is there's an important part of like mourning by everyone involved that happens when you transition. Like when you come out and you transition, you're allowed to mourn the life that you don't have, that you kind of like thought you were going to have. And people around you are allowed to mourn you. As long as they accept who you are now, they're allowed to mourn that loss to a degree. It is, because it is like a loss of like a life that people thought you would have had.
That is what I'm going through recently, and it's probably late in the game. I mean, I'll be 2 in July. Yeah.
Happy 1.5 birthday, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in there. They came out to other people before, in the months leading up to it, so select people, but yeah, that's an off-camera discussion. The it's one of those strange things, and I know we go with the trill and the decks and things, and because you make me think of these things, which I try not to very much, it's been one of those. I don't miss Christopher. I didn't like him very much, but I'm sorry he's gone.
Yeah, and that's okay. That's 100% okay.
Yeah, for me, I guess, because I'm just, like I said, I don't get the mourning thing, but also that might also be because my parents do also accept me, and, well, I mean, whatever, everyone's parents have different feelings. It's just been a lot of, like, positive reinforcement, so I'm just like, well, I feel like changing my name because I feel like this is a better descriptor of me, and I'm just like, my past was my past. Like, I like most of the same things, not a lot feels super different. I just wanted to get rid of the physical dysphoria or whatever. That was always like my main focus. So I am the opposite extreme of the people going deep stealth because they are in a position where they feel they need to, and to be in a position where they feel safe and they feel like they can fully accept themselves and all that stuff.
Well, my ex music partner, and I mentioned, is also trans and is open about it, so that's fine. So I'm not giving anything away. And she came out a year before I did, and while I came out on stage because I'm who I am, she quit the music business entirely and called all her friends to say, "Go fuck yourself," and including me. And I didn't see her until not long ago. And it was a very strange thing. There's an episode of Queer Splaining which covers that. So.
No, I mean, it goes to like, I mean, everyone's allowed to transition in their own way, but it is also like an element of like having to understand that your transition affects others, and by no means happiness and mental stability and what's right for you. But other people are allowed to, again, with the caveat, as long as they accept you for who you are now and treat you the way you want to be treated. Other people are allowed to react to that and have emotional feelings about that. And so, like, I don't know. It just sometimes I see, and again, it's no one does coming out perfectly. It's very difficult. But I also just like, sometimes it's sort of like not allowing space for the people around the person transitioning or coming out to fully feel that safely. Because I've seen, and again, like I said, it's understandable, we're all figuring it out, but I've seen people get very angry when people are like upset that like they're like someone's transitioning in their lives. And it's like, well, they're allowed to be upset. As long as they're not like being out there, it's like, I'll never accept you in this change. It's like, as long as they're like accepting, but it's like, they're allowed to be like, oh, I'm sad that that person is no longer the way I thought they were. But.
Yeah.
I do have one friend who was much more happy with Christy right away, which, well, I've had a lot of friends who are much more happy with Christy, frankly. Of my friends already, they said Christopher was a lot of work.
So, just out of curiosity, because the subject was Star Trek, and
we're still. No. I'm still on the trills. It's okay.
We can get back there.
It
all circles around.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm curious if there's another type of similar related thing that I'm just not aware of, because my Star Trek is limited mostly to Next Gen. I did watch most of DS9 when DS9 first aired, so forever ago, and a little bit of Voyager and very little Enterprise, and yeah, so there's a lot of Star Trek that I have not seen.
The only, to be honest, germane to our conversation, we're talking trans issues. Voyager didn't have much, if any, if I can recall. But the one that does come up that sometimes gets forgotten is in Star Trek Enterprise. There's an episode called Cogenitor, in which in that episode, what happens, and it's an interesting one to dissect, because the Enterprise comes across a 3-gendered species. It has male, female, and then a third gender, which is, that third gender is played like a they wear all gray and have no determinate gender. So basically they look like a sort of non-binary, like a stereotypical non-binary. I have no personality traits other than I like the color gray. view. So they come across that species, and we learn that the third gendered species is called a cogenitor, and they're much smaller in number. So there's only, I think, 1% of their population or 2% of their populations are cogenitors. And cogenitors are required for copulation. So in order to have a child, male and a female need to have a cogenitor to have a kid. And so the cogenitors basically are treated like slaves and like idiots. They're stupid. They don't have any intelligence, and they get passed around. Basically, like honestly, like kind of like the Handmaid's Tale, in a very benevolent, weirdly Star Trek way, where they basically get passed from house to house to have children with. It's very handmade. It's actually very, very Handmaid's Tale. And the plot of the episode goes: Trip, the engineer, is fascinated with this third gender, and discovers that the cogenitor of this family that he's, friends with, actually is very intelligent and can read, can talk, is just as smart as anyone else. So he kidnaps the cogenitor and brings it to Enterprise, saying, like, this is wrong. We shouldn't let them treat them this way. Sets off a diplomatic incident with this species. Archer, the captain, gets really pissed off. He's like, you shouldn't have done this. How dare you? We don't get involved in the species. And so they have to give the cogenitor back to the planet, and the cogenitor decides to kill themselves. And that's how the episode ends.
Yeah.
That is
That's our story. That's our story too, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's very dark.
Super dark.
I had heard that there were some that there were good Enterprise episodes, but
Yes.
and that sounds like that does sound like a good Enterprise episode, honestly. Just dark.
It's dark as hell. I mean, like, it's like played weirdly, like at the end it gets clearly dark, but like this, like, oh, we use it to have children, and you're like, okay, that's whatever. But then you like think about like watching something like The Handmaid's Tale. I'm like, oh no, that's quite clearly The Handmaid's Tale going on there. So it's like played much lighter until the end, but when just it was like that's all sorts of effed up.
One of the people in chat is requesting an alternate happy ending to the episode.
This is the thing. This is the other thing too with talking about like any representation, especially in Star Trek, but especially LGBTQ representation in Star Trek and in a lot of media, is that trans people and LGBT people often have sad endings. Like every single time in a lot of these stories, like Dax doesn't end up with the woman that she has feelings for. They get like torn apart by society. In the Outcast, the non-binary person who believes she's who like identifies as a woman and wants to come out as a woman, she gets brainwashed into losing her gender, her feeling of gender. So she's just like, okay, she's back to being non-binary again. And in Cogenitor, commits suicide. And the reason they do that is it's this idea of like, oh, if we make it sad in the end, the people who want to learn the message, they would like this. The episode's not being made for us. It's not being made for trans people. It's not being made for LGBTQ people. It's made for straight people who don't get LGBTQ issues to care about the LGBTQ issues. And so therefore, the ending is sad. So it makes straight people who are watching the episode be like, oh, that's so horrible. We should be treating those people better. I don't want that to happen to them. And so it creates this like system of pity for queer people. And it sort of reinforces this like the message is good, and I get it, and I get why that they do that. It's like this impetus like want to go out and do something to change things. And that's what Star Trek's all about, like creating desire for change. But it also leaves trans and LGBTQ people with our representation being like, oh, look, all we get is to be oppressed and sad and depressed. And it's even more horrible when you look in the context of Star Trek, which is like supposed to be this bright future that everyone's and all we get to be is killed or brainwashed.
See, this is one of those things where I think shows need to, if they're going to do stuff like that, it might help or it would probably help for there to be a queer character, and that queer character to know someone in an episode who goes through all of the horrible stuff, so that you can have like all the because one episode doesn't explain everything about a person, and so that way you can flesh out a character and go through a lot of the issues without and having a character who there's something worthwhile to care about the character. And
also just like character who just exists. Like I'm trans and I'm not defined by being trans, but I'm just I happen to be a trans person that is having fun in a giant spaceship.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I've lost it entirely.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. What was the last thing you said? I'm sorry.
Shit, I don't remember the last thing I said. I totally lost. That there should be someone who is queer who is consistently on the show, and then you have an episode where someone that they know or something gets all the bad stuff to happen to them. That way you can maintain the sort of people can have the parasocial relationship with a queer person so that they can feel like they know them, and that helps normalize, just queer people existing and stuff.
Well, funny you should say that. There has been a queer character that has died and had a comic book resurrection.
Who?
In Discovery.
Oh, they didn't have a comic book resurrection. They actually came back on the show.
Well, yes, but a comic book resurrection as.
You like in terms of the like type of story. Gotcha. I thought you meant they came back in a comic.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Gotcha. No, very true. That's also a very interesting case. Sorry, I don't want to. I can rant about that.
Yeah.
Oh, please rant away.
Wait.
I wanted to mention
before you rant away. Technically, now is when our little lines for we should at the very least say that people can come in, and if you want to and if I see you and hang out for debate, we can chat and invite you on for Discord. I can go make a Discord link quick, but go ahead and rant about this. A separate Discord link, because I don't remember the Discord link, so just post that everywhere.
I think the way they brought him back was very much a comic book story.
Oh, I agree. I mean, the interesting thing with that character, so where to even begin? Because there's so much to download there. First off, I should say I really loved them just being in Star Trek Discovery to begin with, because they were like two gay characters who just happened to be gay on the show, and it wasn't like a big deal that they were gay within the show. They just happened to be gay, which is exactly what I'm talking about. It's sort of like just characters who can be gay. And yeah, every once in a while, they're like them being gay may come up to inform a decision. Like there's in season 2, they have some like jokes and discussions about being gay. So that it's like, it's not irrelevant to the conversation, but it's not their defining feature. Like both Stamets is more defined as like an engineer, and Hugh is more defined as a doctor than they are as gay men. It's just a facet of them. So I loved that. And I think that's what Star Trek just needs, more queer people in general to discuss, just to be like, look, queer people can exist in multifacets, multiforms. They don't have to be like this, your punching bag for all the issues that oppress queer people. They can be many, many things. And yes, sometimes queer oppression will come up, but it doesn't have to define them.
Well, I think that the lack of definition also helps with or the lack of being defined
by their gender or sexuality.
And I think that helps with the not making queer people feel like damsel in distress equivalent, just like completely unable to do anything.
I know you haven't seen Discovery, but they gave the one character a really, really heroic. I'm going down with the ship, and my patients come first, and all of that. Ending death, but it was tone deaf in one sense, in that you're taking away the gay couple.
Yeah, and the fact that he was killed, he was the man of color, also is an interesting point to make. Something I can't really.
So how can we?
It's two guys from Rent, so you know. Yeah.
And who, ironically, Wilson Cruz, who played the trans character in Rent, which is funny.
Yeah.
We have someone who might want to come into chat. No, sorry. Okay, never mind.
They're welcome.
Yeah, they're welcome to. Trying to view the rules page and clicked on the wrong part. Okay, that's fine. You're welcome to come in and
I gotta open up
have a talk with us.
I have to open up a certain window here.
Just the rules. Do you seem unable? I need to send you a link because we are currently on Zoom. It's a complicated series of things. So.
But I'm paying for the Zoom, so we're good. I'm actually paying for something on the internet. It just doesn't feel right.
I only pay for things on the internet at this point. What was the other thing I was? Yeah, there was the other thing too.
You have some serious rants about the way that was handled. Yes, the guy, the man of color.
Which is not something it's something that people have brought up, and it's not something I should particularly be the one to discuss, but I know it's been an issue within communities of color while watching the show. So it's worth mentioning. And it was just unfortunate to be like, oh, you built up, like, in the promotion of the show, like, look, our first gay couple, we're having gay people on the show. And then in the show, they handled them so well. And then immediately in the first season, they kill off one of them. And it's just like, oh, okay, so you're going to do this sort of like what I was talking about earlier, less like, oh, bury your gays storyline.
Yeah.
And it's just frustrating. And they did bring him back in season 2, which I loved. And I loved how they made his death have consequences. I thought that was really, really brilliant. That it wasn't just like, oh, he's back now and we're just going to ignore stuff. It's like, no, he came back and he had trauma stemming from that, which was, I thought if they were going to rectify that mistake, that was the right way to go. Yeah. And I really hope in season 3 that they just allow them to be a couple that exists and enjoys being a couple, and that they have that it's not like smooth sailing, but that it's not defined by like trauma, which is what
there's another thing I like about Discovery, and it's a point I probably shouldn't make, but I will. Just on the off, it has nothing to do with the trans and all that, but redheaded woman of size, that's nice. You have not had,
and clearly on the spectrum, the autism spectrum too.
Yes. Oh yes, very much. But that I'm not, I don't think, but I don't care if I am. If that makes any sense.
No, it totally makes sense.
Yeah, Tilly's my character, obviously.
No, I identify a lot with Tilly, especially mostly from the autism spectrum thing of like, I mean, you can already tell on this call of like, I identify with the being able to keep talking endlessly and not knowing when to stop. I get that very much.
I get that a lot too. Sorry if I'm a little unresponsive. I'm trying to fix several things at once. Apparently, there's been some issues with the Fluid Voice Discord page, so I'm just fixing them.
That's fine. We both talk a lot, so it's you know.
Well, I also talk a lot.
Perfect. Also, I'm curious what your thoughts are as well. Sorry.
Wait, what? Oh, Perfect.
Yeah,
I'm curious what Perfect.
What about
thoughts are too.
I was just saying if you've had any thoughts, you've been quiet, so I'm curious to hear.
Yes, well,
or anyone said that sparked thoughts.
not really. I'd consider Jadzia Dax as being a candidate for the conversation, and we've already covered that quite a bit.
Yeah.
I also should say Esri is a wonderful character too that doesn't get her due often. But.
And I was thinking earlier about Odo, of all things. Right now, because my surgery is delayed and all of that, the idea of imitation is coming out. He can be a person, but never be, but he can, but never fully look like it. Or
yeah, and that's actually I talked about Odo. I did a recent video about my surgery, and I actually talked about Odo in there. And one of the interesting things with that is they talk about in that show with the founders, with the shapeshifter people, that when they become something, like when they become like a rock, they start to feel like the properties of those things. And so there's this interesting concept of like, I talked about it in my video in terms of my surgery. I when I got, breast augmentation surgery recently, there was a bit of a thought of like, I was debating whether I should for the longest time, because it was like, oh, I don't want to feel like I'm doing this just to like fit into the stereotype of like, oh, women have breasts. Because but I also realized like it would make existing in that body would make me feel more like myself, more like the way I want to feel. And so it's not about trying to, or at least it shouldn't be about trying to conform to some gender norm, but existing in your body is the way that it makes you feel and exist in the way that you wish to. And so I've kind of connected with that in sort of the shapeshifter form. And then Mackenzie in the chat brings up a very good point, is that the unfortunate thing with the shapeshifters, to be fair, is that they gendered them. Like, they're these amorphous blob things that somehow still decide to be man or woman.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
Like, and also really shows just how deeply ingrained the ideas of gender are in society, regardless of how ridiculous the situation is. Like, there should be no gender for amorphous blobs that can be anything. Like, I assume that they do asexual reproduction just based on the fact that they're blobs. And
yeah, I mean, Odo was like one of the kids that they like sent off, and it was like implied that they just kind of like split off. So I think, yeah, asexual reproduction.
Yeah, and so it would be totally weird for them to have genders. Like, why? I mean, they can turn to a rock. What are they going to do? Gender the rock? Like,
yeah. It's strange. Like, even the characters, like, they define them by gender. Like, the main evil changeling was called the female changeling. Like, that was her name. Like, that canonically.
That's weird.
Yeah.
That's so many levels of weird.
Yeah, I was picturing her in my mind just before you said that, so it's
well, this is the thing. Like, we sit here, what I always think about, what I always like have this interesting break. You're sitting here saying like it's weird, of like they've gendered this changeling, and that makes perfect sense, because like we think about it, and it's just like weird that they would gender these things. But I know there are people out there who's like, it'd be weird if you didn't. And I'm like, why? It's like these weird arbitrary rules that we like fill in by society. And it's just like, if you think about it for 10 seconds, it makes no sense. But like for some people, just forcing things into these like pre-existing boxes.
Well, you both are non-binary.
Yeah.
And I'm very binary. So, which
Well, so on my screen,
Yes.
it's non-binary people above the binary people. So it's
my,
nice and organized that way.
on my screen, I'm sitting next to my friend, and I'd be sitting next to my friend no matter where I was on the screen. So,
I mean, fair, but
It's also interesting to like. Oh well, that's a whole other conversation. I should.
well, there's so much conversation. And like, honestly, around this point is when we're supposed to just talk about whatever we want to talk about. So dive right in. If you have something interesting to say, dive right in.
Let me hit the freeform with the part of the explanation for the whole why do they keep writing it that way is because that's if you go out in public with a child, people will come up and say, oh, they're so cute, and they'll be leaning in, and then they'll actually draw back and say, is it a boy or a girl?
Mm-hmm.
That they, as if that was the most important thing for them to know how to interact with this infant, is whether it's a boy or a girl, which also sets up a lesson for that child continually that the most important thing is for them to have that identity.
Mm-hmm. And it's like also the first like thing we like assume about something. Like it's the first like personal piece of information that we assume about somebody. Like when you look at somebody, we are naturally told to like assume things about them, and gender is one of those first things that we assume. When really it's like that whole idea of like judging a book by its cover. It's just like it's a deeply it's a personal thing, and you know, but it's also the first thing that we just like take away from somebody's autonomy and in letting us know. You know, it's like if I guess the best way to put it is like if we.
Oh no, Christy disappeared.
No.
Oh no.
Well, hopefully she'll be back soon.
I guess I'll just finish the statement, I guess, but it's just like the point is like if you wouldn't go into a room and presume you know someone's name. So why do we go into a room and presume someone's gender?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a deeply personal and very complex reflection of how they consider themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And
we just like,
you
hey,
make
yeah,
these assumptions based on outward cues. Okay.
Yeah. And it's like there are many genders as there are people, to be very honest.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get Christy back.
If you can hear us, Christy, we all want you back.
I was just mentioning that everything's still up, which is really good considering Christy is
He's the one in charge.
yeah. So you know, the breaker went again, so so luckily I am running a lot of the stream, so that's good for all the audience that didn't end the stream for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Christy just said carry on or whatever. So we shall carry on.
Charge forward.
Darn it, I feel like there's a Shakespeare quote that I could use that I completely forgot. But that's okay because I forgot a lot of Shakespeare.
Stay calm, carry on.
Yeah, or we could go to the World War II. Keep calm and carry on. Yeah. Mackenzie was thinking the same thing. Yeah. So it is interesting how, and I'm not even sure why society sort of ended up that way outside of basic hunter-gatherer stuff. Mm-hmm. Because obviously the average individual who was born with male primary sexual characteristics is stronger and is at less risk because they can't get pregnant because they're not the ones who are capable of pregnancy. So maybe that was when gender started to slowly be important. But then again, people, once you got like a more constructed society, depending on the society, people are like, yeah, whatever now, because everything that needs to get done is done with tools. Women can get strong enough to wear armor, wield weapons. Well, any gender can arguably get strong enough to wear armor and wield weapons.
To stab somebody.
Well, yeah, or to fire a gun, or to punch someone in the neck hard enough to close their throat. Like, there's a lot of... The human body has a lot of weaknesses, and a lot of weaknesses that we have known about for, like, a couple thousand years. Like, it's not that... it's not that difficult for someone to take someone down regardless of strength. There is a strength that and muscle mass give you a slight advantage, but it's not the only factor. Yeah, tactics matters. Something that gets ignored a lot is obviously the being able to mentally harm other people without flinching first or without hesitating, because most people hesitate, and there's the mental thing. And I don't know why I got into this very violent side of things.
It's a deep hole, because I could go off on many different theories on why gender exists. Like, human for categorization, like we always, like, humans like to categorize things. So it's very much like, hey, look, we have what we can see as like a vagina and a penis, and we'll just like slot those categories, and then it's sort of extrapolated out from there. All these other rules and ideas and systems. Also, it's worth talking about like Western culture and how Western culture has pushed gender very hard, because there are other cultures that like did not gender as heavily. I mean, gender always still kind of exists in most cultures, but to much less degrees than sort of European Western culture. And then how Western culture uses like a tool of oppression as well.
Yeah, if I have watched enough anime, I will mention that there are some elements of anime that suggest that, at the very least in the past, gender was less. Before the major amounts of Western influence, gender was less worried about. Just based on the fact that gender neutral pronouns are used a lot more. There are a lot of gender neutral characters in like almost every anime that I've watched, or well, not every anime has a gender neutral character, but it's been a common thing. And there's a lot of LGBT rights issues in Japan. I'm not trying to suggest that they don't. I mean, it's a very patriarchal country still, but like I think the cultural gender neutral was kicked on the wayside a lot by Christianity.
Japan still has a lot of its issues when it comes to trans people, though, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, definitely. Mostly because fun fact, I used to read back when manga was hard to find. I used to read like an LGBT manga magazine, like manga from an LGBT magazine that got translated.
That's awesome.
And so I really liked Honey X Honey, which was like a sort of, it was essentially word like biography. It was like a memoir, but with manga and LGBT rights, and a lot of it was two women who loved each other. One considered themselves a lesbian, one considered themselves bi. They considered themselves about the same attraction to men, but they talked about how their description of themselves was slightly different, despite the same views on the level of attraction. They're just like, I feel more like a lesbian. One of them felt more like a lesbian, the other one felt more like they were bi. And also they went into the ID thing with their trans man friend.
Huh.
And some of the conversations. Yeah, like Honey x Honey is a really good manga.
I should really check it out, because that sounds like right up my alley in terms of stuff that'd be something I would love to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it talks about LGBT rights in the 90s or whatever. And hey, you're back, Christy.
Welcome back, Christy.
Yeah. Yes.
Which, you know,
I have the keys.
Very Trill-like.
We all missed you.
Yeah, we did.
That's a good segue. That was great.
My circuit breaker went again.
Yeah,
So,
that's just
I have some stuff to fix.
Sounds like Buffalo.
Oh.
For those in the audience, we're both Buffalonians? Buffalites?
Buffalonians, yeah.
Buffalitos?
whatever. I'm dealing with.
We just call them wings. That's all.
Whereas I'm busy in Minnesota experiencing third winter.
You're the second person I've talked to today from Minnesota. My best friend's from Minnesota, so.
Yeah, third winter, because we already went through second winter and now it's third winter. It's snowing again. It was snowing like a ton.
What about third winter and 11th?
Yeah, I know. I saw a meme about that. First winter.
We're doing that too, so.
I'm in LA.
Yeah, the weather turned to chilly here.
Okay. Nope, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, perfect. What'd you say? Perfect? Perfect?
Bueller?
Bueller?
Oh no.
Okay. Oh no.
Right,
have we lost Perfect? Are we just losing people right and left?
No.
But they come back. It is very comic book deaths here.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll say Los Angeles I'm in LA, and it's like almost never looked better because of all the everyone self-isolating. All the streets are empty, and so all the smog is gone. So it's seriously, I drove up on the hills above LA, and I'm like, I can actually see the city, and it's not covered in smog. So that was a sort of cool surprise, and I'm like, oh, and it's been raining a lot, so it's actually green instead of the brown drab it usually is. So it's like, wow, LA can actually be pretty if you stop people from existing in it.
Oh, don't go into the bio or not bio. The enviro. Don't go all enviro-fascist on us. That's the important part, being like humanity is the problem or whatever.
I mean, it's not necessarily wrong, but there's definitely some middle ground between let's murder everybody to save the planet and fucking the planet to death. Use my language.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, oh yeah, swearing's fine. I forgot to fucking mention that.
I've been trying to avoid it.
I mean that's fine if you avoid it. I don't actually swear that much, and my parents were fine with us swearing, so I don't know why that is. Maybe I just rebelled against my parents a bunch. Maybe that's why I cared about capitalism for a while, a bunch more than I do now in high school, just to rebel against my socialist parents.
So what I should do then when I raise my kids is just be like the uber capitalist and make my kids work for all their everything. Then they'll rebel against me and become a socialist, and I'll be like, yes, I've done my job.
Oh god. This is where, weirdly enough, I found this when doing the interviews and stuff, which I shall now resume now that I can speak for any length. I found myself code switching a lot. I just switched to whoever, Sophia was on last week when she was on the channel. We were fuck shit all that, like every other word, and I'm like, I'm cool with this, and crazy and stuff. And you're much more not stayed.
I'll fucking swear like a sailor. I just generally have learned to avoid it being on like YouTube where you can get demonetized and stuff. I've tried to be a good filter, but if you come meet me over here in Los Angeles, and you'll hear me swear like a sailor all day long.
Well, yeah, and I have this thing. Well, for one thing, shortly after getting hit by a car or whatever, I did run a D&D session within like a month after or something, or a month and a half, and I couldn't stop swearing, which was funny, and I did complain about the fact that I couldn't stop swearing, but I also promised if I get 700 Twitter followers or whatever to do a bunch of Les Mis, but just add swearing, just add a bunch of swearing to Les Mis, and just try to sing. For one thing, I love Les Mis, and have loved it since I was a kid. So like, I know this. I don't know all the songs by heart. I know some of the songs by heart.
I've never
it's a long
seen
play.
them, to be fair. I need to watch it.
All right, wait, which? So
I've never. I know
never
of it.
seen
I've
the
heard
play?
some of the songs. I've never seen the play. Never read it. Never watched the movies. I know the recent one was not great.
Arguably, the recent one is the best one that they've done for movies, because from everything I've heard, the other movies were not as enjoyed.
I know the story of it. I know the story front to back, and I've heard the music, but I've not like sat down and watched like a recording of the play or gone to see the play. And I want to.
I read the book.
Okay,
nerd.
It's a very long book, and there's a lot of tangents.
Did you read the abridged version or the full version?
First version I read was the Classics Illustrated version, but I kid you not. But I read the unabridged. Yeah, the 1962 translation.
Okay, I'm not entirely certain. It's possible my mom has the unabridged version in French, for all I know, because she totally would do that, because so many people in my family know French, and I know almost no French, and like one of my sisters is has like a French fiance, and it's just like I really need to learn French. So I put my Final Fantasy VII game in French, and maybe if I take off subtitles, I can pick up some more French.
It's
not a bad idea, honestly.
You know, my first language was Spanish, right? I've mentioned this before at some point.
You probably have. I just didn't remember.
That's okay. It's not something and it was beaten out of me by my stepfather, which is one of the oddities. My both my mother and sister can speak fluently. Mother 7, and if you count American Sign, and my sister 5, and I'm stuck with English, but I speak it well. So.
Yeah, my mom knows 4 languages. My dad knows. I think my dad also knows 4 languages. I don't know how much of the 4th language he knows. I know my dad knows English, Spanish, and French. My mom knows English, Spanish, French, and German. My dad might know some Hindi. I know he studied it a bunch. He was really obsessed with that.
I just know barely like the elementary school Spanish stuff.
Well, the funny thing is, if I watch a Spanish movie, I can follow it fine.
I know some German. I know very little French. I know almost no Spanish, and obviously I was born and raised in English. Oh, also I know the tiniest bit of Hebrew.
Oh, yeah, I totally forgot. Latin. I'm pretty good with Latin. During the 1 year my mother was in law school, we only spoke Latin in the house.
Oh, that's no, it's actually
cool.
Yeah, that is. I occasionally try to get my mom to teach me French, and then I get distracted by life, which is unfortunate. I'm better at typing in at least in German. I'm better at typing than I am with speaking German.
Nice. I just got a text. I just want to make sure it was nothing important. It wasn't.
Okay. Yeah. So, what are some other political Star Trek issues? Actually, I'm curious. As long as we have you on here, what are some political Star Trek issues that have been interesting or whatnot?
I loved the angry Jessie one from the other day. The video you did.
That one was a fun one. That one was me venting my frustration at the current administration, and God, I mean, it could go all day on so many different things within Star Trek. I mean, that's why I have the whole channel. But the one I did the other day was talking about Star Trek Picard, but it was using Star Trek Picard to like kind of talk about our current. The fact that the Trump administration is basically just, failing completely during this crisis, but also leaving the most vulnerable among us, the most vulnerable communities, to be ravaged by COVID, which is really just pisses me right off. And it just goes to like issues of like dehumanization and how we belittle people in this country and systemically limit their access to healthcare benefits. So that video is just sort of like using Star Trek as a jumping off point to talk about that. Which is its whole own thing.
Yeah,
I think of Trump as a slightly more evil Harry Mudd.
Yeah, more than slightly. Definitely more evil. At least Harry Mudd had a somewhat enjoyable personality at times, even though he was a scumbag, awful human.
Yeah, but I mean, Trump had the level of charisma for people to feel like he was worthwhile to vote for.
I don't get it like that. Like his charisma is just so off-putting. I mean, I get it. It's one of those like I get it, but also don't.
No, I don't wish I did. There's a lot of things I don't understand in this world. There are a lot of strange things that most people don't understand that I do understand, and there's a lot of things that most people understand that I don't. So Trump is one of those things I don't understand. I don't understand at all.
I get the idea of like. I mean, if you want to go way back to 2016, like I get the idea of this person who is like, who was basically like, oh, this system isn't working, and I'm going to just straight talk you, and that I see how that's appealing. It's just it was coming from this snake oil salesman asshole, and I get the idea of like wanting to break the system. I mean. This is another interesting rant that I'll try and make very short, but like we tend to see these problems in binary, kind of going back to what we were talking about of like, you know, it's they like this side versus this side. But I feel like in a lot of cases, for a lot of people, it's everyone sort of is feeling the same anxieties and issues. The difference and distinction is in what is being offered to them as the problem and solution. Because with Trump, it was like everyone sort of feeling like a loss of jobs, feeling like the government system isn't working for them. It feel like he spoke to that, and that's why you saw like even like sort of nonpartisan support for him at that time, to a degree. And so it's like he offers them up like it's people of color who are the problem. It's people crossing our borders who are taking your jobs, instead of like the real truth of it, which is like, no, there are systemic problems in this country that are fucking awful, that harm everyone, just like our health, like our terrible like work, like you have to be in a job to have a healthcare system. And then there are also things in this country that systemically like oppress poor people, people of color, like more vulnerable communities, and bolster up the elite.
One of the things that I've had. I'm sorry. One of the things I've had. One of the things everybody at this point knows I don't like Bernie Sanders. I suppose this is not I just don't like him as a person. I think he's a terrible person. Who is Trump on our side?
Oh, I disagree with that, but go on.
There's a lot of all about him going on, and the reactions I'm getting from people just the reactions I'm seeing on Twitter towards Biden are so much of the
Bernie or bust crowd.
The Bernie or bust crowd reminds me of the Trump or bust crowd.
Well,
in the way they react, in the way they lie their fucking asses off, or are misinformed to the nth degree. And it's one of the things that makes me happy that, the internet is not real life.
Sure.
Sorry, you can go for it.
Yeah, well, we're on a different topic now than what I was going to bring up, because now Biden and Bernie has been brought up. Because obviously Bernie or bust isn't really helpful unless you're going to actually start a revolution, but there's obviously a lot of people are uncertain of Biden ever fighting against corporate change and
healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare. Biden has, obviously walked back on, and you can argue about, whether or not people would accept the current system would accept things, but everything just seems so stacked with the current system that there needs to be a large push against it for anything to get done. And if historically, like if a third party comes in, obviously people there were laws that were made so that third parties can't get in very easily anymore, and there's a lot of because Bernie did as well as he did, there might be pushback to prevent someone with too far left ideas from ever getting in again, or at the very least try to. And
that's not true.
I mean,
it's just not the way it works.
I mean, I don't necessarily. I mean, there have been definitely like things done to make things more difficult for things outside of the system, because like we frame Democrats versus Republicans, but honestly they have much more in alignment with each other than they don't in a lot of ways.
Well, people do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, specific people. I mean, they're both...
No, I mean people in general have more in common than we have.
But I mean, in terms of like their interest in keeping the current system in status quo, like there is Biden has much more to gain from keeping a sort of more corporate interested status quo than otherwise, than like someone like Bernie would. And by the way, this is not me saying Bernie was by no means a perfect candidate, as no one is, but he was not perfect, but he was definitely someone who I was like, this is someone who could shock the system in the way that it needs to go. And
well, that's the problem with shocking the system, and is that the system shocks back, and one of the results. I'm trying to figure out how to say this because I watched how I watched this in the 70s because I'm old.
Oh, perfect! You're back.
Perfect's back.
I watched this in the 70s, and I watched the backlash with Carter, and how Carter became Reagan, and you do not know how bad Reagan really was. The first few years after that, he was normal, but he had everything going for him, and everything was so much was torn down because we were swinging so far left, at a pace that people can't deal with. We are gradually progressing. Progression is what we want.
Well, we're gradually progressing backwards currently.
Well, yes, we're regressing and there's going to be a smashing backlash. I'm reasonably sure,
but people are starving while that happens too.
See, that's the problem. It's like I get the argument. I 100% understand this, like, because I've had this argument with a lot of people too. It's like the idea of gradual progression and that we need to go gradually. But there's also an element of me of being like, there are people who suffer and die in that time that are that you're going to say like, well, sorry, we couldn't get to you fast enough. And there's an element of like, people should catch the hell up. And as someone who like loves Star Trek, what's the whole point of Star Trek is to be like, let's teach people and help people accept and learn these lessons.
I very much.
There's people that need to be saved.
Well, sorry I was gone so long.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Is there still enough time for everybody else who wants to have technical difficulties to try to do that?
Sorry, I had technical difficulties early today, so I might not have technical difficulties for this stream.
Oh, okay.
And for the record, because anybody thinks that I am to the left of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, I know.
I am a Democratic socialist of old stripe. Not a tanky, but and I went through the tear the whole thing down and yikes, that was a bad idea. I'm pretty sure that Biden is going to pick the governor of Michigan for vice president, but I would rather he pick Warren.
I mean, Warren would be the ideal. That would be, I mean, as much as I would still have problems with him having like some semblance of like, reaching out towards the like more progressive left wing of the party to be like, all right, let's unify on this. That would do a long way towards making me feel a lot better about him. It's like, you know what? I'm going to go out and vote. I will vote for him. And I'm very much like, not Bernie or bust. It's Bernie or activist, in my opinion. It's like, I'm going to vote Biden, but I hold him accountable. I'm going to try to, keep fighting and keep pushing for these ideas. And, it was never just about Bernie. It should never have been about Bernie. And the people who just say it's Bernie or bust are missing the point in the long run anyways. So, but what I do, so that's going to happen regardless, at least from my end. I hope that and that's what I'm going to try and push and use whatever platform I have to say. But
absolutely.
But what was the other? I had another point that I was going to make off of that. What was I lost what I was going to say. But there was another segment after that. That was that.
I'm firmly in the anybody but Trump.
Yeah.
I do not want to see another term of Trump.
Yeah, well, the thing I was going to get into before Christy said stuff about Bernie and Biden and got me down that road was about the problems with the conditioning of nationalism and the importance given to nationalism, almost like a deity. I've heard it described, because you can't describe nationalism by what it is. Almost.
I mean, getting it, if you want to bring this full circle, talk about Star Trek, where Star Trek, the Federation is the whole impetus for the Federation getting started in Star Trek lore is there's a World War III, which eliminates nationalism and actually creates a global community and makes people, humanity, start to understand that we're all connected together. Which, you know, one would hope that the current world events would showcase, but
ideally minus the World War III.
Ideally minus the World War III. But I mean, like, if we're gonna try and extrapolate that, it's like, look at what's happening right now. If there is not more evidence that we all influence each other and affect each other for better or for worse, and we need to work together to solve these things, it's a global pandemic, you know?
Well, everyone's closing their borders now, which is
just a doubling down on nationalism when the exact opposite is necessary.
Well, one of the things I heard described, which I really like, was that caring about nationality is fine so long as you define nationality by not by something that should be praised or loved, but something that has to be here for the current situation. It's like the shitty thing that you have to have at the moment in order to get stuff done at the moment. And
also, like, that's the joy of the American, like, American ideals in some way. Like, American ideals are fucked up in a lot of ways, but in the base idea of, like, we can criticize, it's good to criticize our leaders and government. That's a beautiful ideal.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but also there's the depending on I know back in high school, and I don't know how much has changed, but there's the whole almost worship of the idea of America,
pledge allegiance to the flag,
and all the praise over you know, America is the best, America is number one, you should, you know, be proud, or our soldiers are
American. We're at least,
our soldiers are divine emissaries to bring the American ideal to the world.
The best trained military in the world. The best trained. It's like,
and that's
what does that even mean?
And that's not to say that obviously military personnel get fucked over hardcore by the country, and the people obviously need as a lot of support to deal with their experiences and whatnot. It's just